I'm Julie Lyles Carr, and you're listening to the Modern Motherhood Podcast from AllMomDoes, where our aim is to equip, encourage, and inspire you for the life you're living, the kids you're raising, the relationships you're navigating. My guest today, Scarlet Hiltibidal, had a fascinating childhood growing up on the Saturday Night Live set with her mom, Victoria Jackson. She got to have some incredible experiences in that world. But as she entered adulthood, she realized that fear and anxiety were hijacking so much of her joy and love of life. And she joins me today to talk about how she is learning to keep living forward when you're afraid of all the things. Scarlet, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Julie. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, this cover is gorgeous, and the topic, man, couldn't be more timely. But before we jump into that, tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, where you live, the kiddos, all that.
I live right outside of Nashville. I'm married to Brandon. He works at the headquarters of Lifeway, and he does marketing for small group Bible studies. And I've got 3 kids. They're all girls, ages 8, 5, and 3. We adopted the middle one, Joy, from China about a year and a half ago. And she was born without any ears. She was born deaf. And so we spent the year prior to her adoption learning sign language. And so that's kind of what our life is right now. We're just continuing to learn sign language. Joy's a little miracle, and I'm sure I'll talk more about that later. And we recently moved. We were closer to Nashville and in a townhouse, and we recently moved to a farm. And I grew up in big cities, so I don't know what I'm doing at all. All of our plants are dead. The animals are gone. We tried chickens. It's a long story, but we just have a hamster now. So that's our family. Hamster on a farm.
That is a hamster living large right there.
Seriously.
A hamster who gets a whole farm to himself.
He's a free-range hamster.
He's a free-range hamster.
Yes.
Yeah. There's another word for those. They're called rats.
But
whatever. I mean,
I agree. No, I've never touched him. And it's like my goal of life to never have to touch him.
Never touch him.
I love the girls. I want them to be happy, but I don't want to touch him.
Yeah. Well, we'll just leave that up to them. So.
Yeah.
And, I can tell you from personal experience, hamsters are not hard to kill off. Should it become necessary,
Well, we have some woods, and
Oh, yeah, and we're back to free-range hamster.
We might take him for a little walk in the woods.
You got to do what you got to do. So I got to ask, how does a girl who just is a self-proclaimed fraidy cat go from living in a city situation where you kind of know the parameters to being out in the woods with 3 kids, one of whom you went and intentionally adopted knowing that she was going to have special needs? How does that girl get to this today?
That's a great question. It would take me 272 pages to tell you. Well, man, where do I start? It's a long story. Yeah, self-proclaimed scaredy cat for sure. My first memories are of being afraid, having nervous stomach in the car on the way to school. My parents had recently been divorced. Like you said, I was in big cities. My adoptive dad, I was 5 or 6 when I met him. And his dad owned some land that was about 5 hours away from where we lived when my mom got remarried. And I remember driving to visit that farm, and it was the most terrifying thought to me because I thought there are no ambulances, there are no hospitals, there are no helpers, there are no, because I'd grown up in New York City and Los Angeles, it felt safe to have people everywhere. Because if something bad's happening, you're just like, hey, help, and then someone comes. So it is really funny that I'm on a farm now. Yeah, I was not interested in farm life at all. And my husband has some country roots, and, it's just, this book is like my testimony of just God teaching me to rest in the gospel. And so little by little, the adoption thing was just totally a desire that he planted in me. My husband had always wanted to adopt, and that was such a cool season. It was a year and a half ago, and I was just kind of protected in this bubble of peace because I'm not a naturally peaceful person at all. And we just knew as a family, God wanted us to go get her. And it was just one of those things where you can't explain it if you don't know the Lord, but he was so with us and he was so leading us. And there were scary moments after, like when I met her and she wasn't just deaf, she couldn't walk, she wasn't potty trained. And we knew that on paper, but actually meeting her,
different experience.
Yes, it was really scary and hard. But just the blessings that have come from it have been amazing. And yeah, I don't know. Did that answer your question?
Yes, absolutely. And I think you said something that I want to circle back to. You talk about, your earliest memories are being afraid. Yeah. And do you think that there was something traumatic that triggered that for you, or you just remember that always being part of your footprint?
Well, it's hard to say because, your formative years when you don't remember anything really until you're like 5. And that's when my parents got divorced. So it's kind of hard to say because I noticed that I was afraid. And I wound up in my pediatrician's office saying, I feel like I'm going to throw up every day. And him saying, you're really healthy. You're just really wound up too tight, you know. But my little life was kind of in turmoil because it's really confusing to go through a divorce as a kid. And, you know, I was raised in a Christian home. So my mom was pointing me to the truth and pointing me to Christ. But I was, to a little kid, you can hear the Bible and then be like, okay, right, but where's my dad and where's my house? So I just remember feeling very confused. And then I do have some memories of before the divorce, and I don't remember being afraid then. So I do think it was probably just came out when I
somehow associated in all of that. Right.
Yeah.
So what did you do as a child to try to mitigate that feeling of fear, that feeling of anxiety? I mean, obviously you were having expressions of it, you know, nervous stomach, things like that.
Yeah.
But what were some things that you were doing that were self-soothing to you as a child?
Yeah. You know, it's so interesting to be in this position where I've written a book because you live your life and you're not really psychoanalyzing your actions, you know?
you're just surviving. Yeah.
Right. I was just surviving. And then I wrote the book. It's about fear and anxiety. It's how to rest in the gospel, but it's also very much like a memoir. So really, like, writing the book has kind of caused me to look back and be like, what did I do, you know?
Yeah.
And I think the answer is I was a perfectionist in the most intense and unhealthy way. I remember first grade, the teacher said, fold your hands on your desk. And I would, like, put my arms so tight and so folded, like they weren't going anywhere. I was so stressed out. So I think that just as a child, it was like earning good grades, having people like me, figuring out that. And then I got into high school, and then it was, okay, this football player and I have to get married when we're 18. Yeah. And it was like every decision I made was, how do I make teachers love me? I'm going to have a 4.0. How do I make him love me? You know? And then in college, I just kind of stumbled into eating disorders, and it was always about control. I didn't know it at the time. At the time, I was like, I want to lose 5 pounds. And that just kind of spiraled out of control and became definitely a form of self-medicating, just being in control. And God was just so gracious in freeing me of that. That's a whole other story. But he kept directing me to Proverbs 28:13. I only write about this a tiny bit in this book. I have another book coming out in the summer where I go way more into depth on it. But he kept directing me to Proverbs 28:13 because I was a believer already. At 14 is when I got saved. But when I was stuck in this lifestyle of bulimia, really, I was begging God to heal me, but I was too proud to do what he said. So he kept saying, confess. He kept saying, he who conceals his transgressions will not prosper, but if you confess your sins, you receive mercy. That's Proverbs 28:13. It kept being in my face, and I'd be like, audibly, privately, God, I can't confess this, because it started in college, continued. I meet my husband, I get engaged. He's a pastor at the time. Then I'm a church secretary.
Right.
And I'm bulimic. And it's like, I can't share this, God. I can't confess this. Who am I going to confess this to? It'll ruin my life. And so I just hid it. And you can't keep sin hidden, you know, just in the Bible, bring things into the light. Like, and I just was being disobedient in that. And so when I finally did confess, and I know this is not everyone's story with eating disorders, but for me, as soon as I prayed and prayed and prayed for years. And then when I finally confessed to my husband and a counselor that day, a little over 10 years ago, September 11th, 10 years ago, God completely freed me and healed me of that. It was just the most amazing. I knew it in the moment. I waited 10 years to tell the world because I wanted to wait. But, as soon as that happened, I knew it the next day, and I was like, oh my goodness. And I would go to grocery stores and be like, can I tell you guys what I used to be like and what Jesus did for me? You know? So although I had gotten saved as a teenager, I wasn't really realizing how much I needed Jesus until that point. But, you know, then it kind of changed into, then I got, you know, I was already married. I started having babies, super panicked again, you know?
Right. But that's where a lot of anxiety hit me, was when I started having the kids. Mm-hmm. And I come from what I call a long line of nervous chihuahuas. Like, you know, my grandmother, you know, she'd, all of these worked up, and my mom, and, you know, the proverbial thing back in the South that was very, you know, you have your nerve pills, you know, like you know, they would have never had, you know, some kind of cocktail, but they would definitely have their nerve pills if needed to try to calm them down. Yeah, it was a big thing. Yeah. And so there was sort of this pattern that I really thought, watching my grandmother, watching my mom, who were just so wound up. I thought, well, I'm not going to be like that. And I really didn't struggle with that a whole lot until I started having the babies. And it was that just kind of kicked off for me, just so much concern about them and what was going on and who was around them and all the things. And so it's interesting how I think you can even go in and out of seasons where there are certain things that you do find a relief from, but then there may be something just right around the corner. Back in a moment with Scarlet Hiltibidal. I've just got to take a minute and introduce you to our content coordinator, Rebecca Beckett, and our producer, Donna Toti. Rebecca is married to Kyle and is a mom to 2 kiddos. She leads our team for AllMomDoes, a fantastic community, website, and social presence for moms in all walks and seasons of life. And Donna, a mom of 2 adult kids and a wife, is this genius of a producer, carefully listening and editing and crafting each and every episode of the Modern Motherhood Podcast just for you. It really does take a team to put out this much content every week, both through allmomdoes.com and the podcast. And it takes a team to let others know about the encouragement, inspiration, and tools we hope you found here. I'd like to ask you to take just a minute to make sure you've subscribed to the podcast. It helps you out because it means that the podcast will come to your phone or inbox each week, depending on where you like to get your podcasts. And while you're there subscribing, please leave us a 5-star rating and a review. I'd love to feature your review on an upcoming episode. Thanks so much for being part of the Modern Motherhood Podcast team by helping us get out the word about the podcast. There was a new study that came out just a couple of weeks ago that talks about girls today are seeming to struggle more and more with these levels of anxiety, with these levels of stress. Do you think that maybe is associated to the world feeling even maybe a little more out of control in some ways? I mean, some people would argue we're living, when I look at my grandmother and she was raising my mom during World War II, I look at my mom and dad raising me during a time that President Kennedy had been assassinated just a few years before I was born. And then we had RFK who was assassinated and we had Martin Luther King who was assassinated and the Vietnam War was going on. I'm like, what were y'all doing bringing children into the world, And yet here we are in what I think some of us would say is more of a geopolitical safety line and things, or the economy's been more stable. And yet girls today are showing these higher levels of anxiety. Do you think there's that control thing still at play here?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm definitely no expert. I wrote my testimony and how I learned to rest in the gospel. As you're talking, I'm thinking, I wonder if it's because we have so much information available to us,
Yeah.
Because you can go on the internet, and I've done this. You can look up any horrible thing on YouTube. You can look up any natural disaster, the shows we watch, I wonder about that because you're right. The world has, there was murder in the first family. It's not like the world is worse. I don't think. I don't know. I'm not an expert, but I just wonder about that. Just being able to see and know so much about everything.
That makes a lot of sense to me because when you think about, back even just a few years ago, we didn't have a constant stream of news going on.
Right.
We didn't, you had to wait for the 6:00 news, or you had to wait for the newspaper the next morning.
Yeah, we were living our lives.
We were living our lives and news events and important news events that we should pay attention to were happening, but we weren't consuming them continually. We weren't getting, alerts on our phones. And I do think a lot of that. And I wonder within the social media context, like if I was jealous of a girl looking at a boy that I liked, I was only having to deal with that in the moment by the lockers in junior high.
Right.
I wasn't going home and able to continue to consume that and look at what was going on his social media walls and on that girl that I was worried about what was going on her social media wall. I didn't have a way to continue to evaluate it.
Yeah. I had a house phone and I could talk to my friend little Christy on the phone for 20 minutes on school nights. Right. That was it. I think about, because I was in that weird generation where I remember before technology, before we had computers. I was like the last person to remember that. I was probably like in 6th or 7th grade when we got a huge computer and my mom had a huge cell phone. But yeah, we just saw the people we were with for a second. And to me, I think about girls today posting things with their maturity level. Like, oh my goodness, do you know how Facebook has like those memories?
Oh man.
I delete stuff that I posted 2 years ago. I'm like, why did I say that?
Why did I do that?
Can you imagine in middle school putting things out into the world that are there forever? That gives me anxiety just to think about that.
It's a new kind of anxiety now. I know. But I really do think about just the access and and what we're continuing to feed ourselves. And that is part of the thing with anxiety, right? Whether it's today with the constant content that we can consume, or if it's just you by yourself, not even looking at news or anything else. But it is what the mind gets in a loop. It's what the mind just keeps saying to itself over and over. And I think that's the voice that often is the most difficult to quell. So how have you learned to allow your faith to begin to quiet that voice and make that peaceful voice louder?
Yeah, I love talking about this because this is the whole reason I wrote the book. I was stuck for so many years. And honestly, I can think back to seasons, months, years of my life when, just like you explained it, I was so stuck in these loops of whatever it was, whether it was, oh, there's this distant family member and I'm afraid they might ask me this someday. What will I say? And then I'm up at 2 a.m. thinking about that. Or when we lived in a kind of rougher neighborhood and I had my first baby and our neighbors got broken into, and it's like, well, what if, if it's something like that? No matter what it was, I was stuck all the time, and I was frustrated as a Christian because I thought, aren't I supposed to be joyful and peaceful? And I'm not. What is wrong with me, God? Like, am I a Christian? And then I start looping on that.
Right.
And so no matter what it was I was jumping to and from, I always had this really horrible underlying anxiety that I did not do Christianity the right way. And God was not going to say, well done, my good and faithful servant. And I would hear the words of the gospel like, okay, yes, I needed Jesus. I remember you healed me of eating disorders. I know you're real. I've experienced a relationship with you, but why am I still struggling with this? And then the turning point for me, which is very early in the book and just what I've learned to do and how I fight it today, was I got in a room with a group of women, and I'm just so thankful I was with this woman named Elizabeth at the right time. I don't even know her. We were just in the same room. And I had a 3-month-old as my first baby. And I was like, not okay, panicking all the time. I had brought her to this retreat that was for adults because I did not trust her own dad, who's amazing, to keep her for one night. So I'm bouncing her, and all the moms were going around sharing parenting advice. And they were saying, I read Baby Wise. You should read this other book, Attachment Mirror. They're saying all these,
and disparate things, right? Everything from the sleep scheduling to where your baby, and they're all right.
Exactly. And they're all right. And it was like, here's how we discipline our kids. And then an older mom was like, my kids are grown. Here's my advice. And I'm trying to absorb it because it was great advice. Like, everything they were all saying was great. But then it got to this woman, Elizabeth, and she just kind of leaned back, and I didn't know her. And she was like, I have a different goal in my home. I want my kids to behave, but my primary goal is not to have perfect children or to be a perfect mom. That's an impossible goal anyway. My goal is to live the gospel out in my home. And what that looks like practically is if I fight with my husband in front of them, I apologize to him in front of them. And then I apologize if I'm mean to one of them because they threw a tantrum at the Kroger. I'm going to say, I'm sorry, mommy was wrong. I sinned. And then I'm going to pray out loud, and I'm going to show them how to repent. I'm going to show them what it looks like to speak to the Lord, have a relationship with him, accept his forgiveness, turn from your sin. I don't want to hide my sin from them. And I also don't want to just be okay sinning. I want to teach them conflict resolution. So she's just talking through her home. And then she said, I just want my kids and my husband and people who are around us to know that we're weak and we need Jesus every day. And that was it was like an earthquake happened in my heart because I had heard the gospel and I had maybe even heard it that way. I don't know, but it had never clicked in my heart that I could actually rest. Oh, I don't have to strive to be perfect. It's not going to work. Yeah. But I don't have to despair when I fail, because that was a big thing for me because I mess up all the time. So I'd mess up and then I would be like, how could I have said that? Or how could I have done that? And I would just get stuck on the loop of I'm the worst. And it's just not get, yes, I am the worst. That is the Bible. I'm the chief of sinners. But if you just get to, right, but that's why Jesus came, right, then you can rest. And so that changed my life, being with Elizabeth in that room. And I just started to force myself to have new goals as a mom. Okay, I'm not going to be the perfect mom. I'm going to be the mom who points everything to Jesus. When I do something good, I'm going to point to Jesus. When I fail, I'm going to teach my family, this is why Jesus came here, because we cannot be perfect. It changed my marriage. We got involved in a church that just makes the gospel kind of central to everything we do. That's how I learned to rest. I didn't write a book that was and now I'm all better. Because, honestly, this week I was in the loop and I know the truth. That's the whole thing is how do you deal with it? You preach the gospel to yourself because the gospel is the hope that we have. It's the truth. it's the only way out of the loop to just remember that Jesus is making all things new. And all this stuff that worries us is going to be dead in God forever. We have hope in him, So I was stuck in the loop about some things this week, and I was preaching to myself, and I was still in the loop. So I reached out to my people, and I was like, will you pray for me? I'm struggling with this. And then they preached the truth back to me. And it was like, oh yeah, we need each other. We need to be preaching this to ourselves. We need to have people in our lives who can preach it back to us and say, you are loved.
Right.
Your soul is safe. You have nothing to fear. And that's what I do.
I love that phrase, that you learn to not despair in your failure. I mean, I think that is really huge, because we see, and I know for myself, we get in this loop where we convince ourselves that we're going to do something that's going to be, if I don't do this, this, and this, then it's going to lead to this catastrophic end. Right. And to really feel the relief of that there can be apology, there can be forgiveness, there can be a reset. I think that's such important truisms for us to really get down on the inside so that we can find ways out of the loop. I think the other thing too, this idea, I know we throw the word community around a lot, but it's the right community, right?
Yes.
I mean, because I've seen community come around some people who are highly anxious, who are very stressed, and they only feed the monster because I know you're right. And then I saw this news story about blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Well, you heard so-and-so got broken into. Well, I heard about blah, blah, blah. And before it's just like, it turns into this, negative catalytic moment that's only feeding it. So I think to be very intentional to find those people and to allow them access into your life, to be able to say, you're doing it, you're getting spooled up.
Yeah.
And I think that is such a wise way of applying the gospel in our lives, is to have that community around us.
Yeah. And you know what I found, like you asked me early on about the adoption, the season that we pursued adoption was a season that I was in community with people, and I wasn't looking for people to get me in line. I was just doing community group with my church. And this family, the Wolf family, they are these people, they haven't adopted. They didn't pressure me to do anything. They just know the Bible. And they're these people who speak in Bible verses. We'd be sitting in small group, and there'd be a question, and we'd answer biblical answers. And they would quote the Bible, chunks of it by memory. And it was just so, I can't even explain it to you. It was like in that season, just being near their family and doing life with them for a season, my fears were just naturally drifting into the background because I wasn't being told, stop being afraid.
Right.
They were just, like you said, the right people. They were people who, not perfect people, just people who are pursuing the hope of the world.
I think that's amazing. So talk about in this experience of going to get your daughter, because so you talk about in some of your videos, your blogs, in the book, fear of tornadoes, fear of firenadoes, fear of planes, fear of, like all these different things. And so you are going to an unknown country. You are flying there. You are going to encounter a little being whom you've never met before, and you're going to bring her home to your other children. I mean,
it sounds crazy.
It does. And for somebody who, self-admittedly is saying, man, I've dealt with anxiety issues and control. And I mean, it sounds like there's no control really in there. No. And so, when you got her home, what was that? Because of course, going and getting her, scary. Bringing her home, now you're back in the familiar, but you've brought this incredibly unfamiliar experience into your familiar. So what was that like?
It wasn't scary. It was extremely hard. And I have found, and I write about a lot of experiences in the book. I write about cancer scares, and I write about when I had an internal organ rupture, like real scary stuff I was just afraid of. And I found in almost every case of my whole life, the scary thing isn't scary. It's the anticipation of the scary thing.
Yeah.
The scary thing is horrible and hard sometimes. I'm not saying the adoption was horrible. I'm saying like when my organ had ruptured, it was horrible pain. But in the moment, I wasn't thinking, I'm so scared. I was thinking, somebody cut me open and fix me, please. Give me something.
I'm now not afraid of a potential surgery. I'm wanting that potential surgery.
Exactly. Yeah. Like no anesthetic. I don't care. Just please. But with the adoption, it was very hard. And we were really well trained by our adoption agency. They said, attachment, it's not the same as with a biological child who grows inside of you and is born trusting you because you're meeting their needs. It's not the same. To meet a child who's come from trauma, it's just really emotionally harder, and give yourself grace. That's what we were told. And even listening to that training, and I mean, I was in this season of that I can't explain to you. It was just supernatural peace because God had told us to do this thing and we were saying not no to every little baby step of it. So I was really peaceful about it. But then meeting her and bringing her home, it was really hard. And I remember having to repent of being prideful and thinking, oh, it's not going to be that hard for me. Like, okay, but I'm not going to struggle with the emotional aftermath of a traumatic, but I did. I struggled. And I'm just so thankful, back to the community thing, that I had people who had adopted before me and said, it's the best decision our family ever made. This is what we say as well. But it's really hard. It's emotional. It's different. Every day you're like, it's not the same. It's not the same. It's not the same as the decisions you're making for a child that what's happened to them every moment of their life, Right. It's like my adopted child will do things and I'll look at her and I'll think, I bet she's doing that because maybe this happened, but I don't know, Right. So it's just a whole different ballgame. Bringing her home was not scary, but it was really hard. And I'm just so thankful that we had people that were, when we first came home, bringing us meals, practical things. And then just getting deeper into it, dealing with the different behaviors and sorting through all that. I'm thankful I had people who would listen non-judgmentally and just say, I'm with you, I'm praying, And just for our family, it's one of my big fears before adoption. I used to be afraid of adoption. I used to think that's really scary and unknown, like you said. But I was afraid of like the emotional aspect, and I was afraid of what it would do to the relational dynamics. Like, what about my other daughters? Are they going to feel jealousy, or are they going to feel this? And it has made the people in my family, every single one of us, more selfless, more patient. It's not easy. She's deaf, so we have learned another language, and it's different. You can't just be like, hey, can you grab that thing over there? You've got to be looking at her. She's got to be looking at you. You've got to communicate more slowly. And it's all been a process, but it's not been something that wrecked my family like I was afraid of before, when it was a foreign concept to me. Like, right. How do people do this? How do they, like you said, bring someone unfamiliar into your familiar? But like all the change that's happened has been wonderful kingdom good things. You know what I mean?
Good stuff.
Yeah. Like the change that you hope for your family. Like I want my kids to be compassionate people who are patient, Right. And that for sure is happening, and I'm watching it, and it's so cool.
So how do you think, because I think there are people who deal with anxiety and they don't even actually realize that's what they're dealing with.
Yeah.
They are angry, or they think they're just kind of down, or they are just, I'm type A. I'm just a type A personality. What are some markers that now that you're kind of processing through the other side, and I love how you say it. It's not that you're saying you're just, I never deal with this and it's all gone now, but what are some markers for you where okay, I'm starting to spool up that people can be on the lookout for?
Man, so this happened last week. I'm learning from my 85-year-old grandmother. We had a family prayer the other day. She lives pretty close to me, and we had a canasta night where we were playing canasta.
Canasta, baby. Wow.
So great. It's a favorite game.
It's awesome.
And we were praying, and I love listening to older people pray because you can just tell, like, people who have been walking in the faith for a long time, just listen to their prayers. And she was praying that she said something like, help us to be full of joy and peace, because that's our testimony. And I thought, how cool. And like her life now, she doesn't work anymore. She's home. She'll see the mailman, and she's praying, God, help me to have joy and peace with the people that I'm interacting with today, because that is what sets us apart, that we have this hope. What sets us apart is not that we are better, awesomer, greater people. We're forgiven and we have hope. So for me, when I'm not feeling joyful and peaceful, those are the markers for me, because man, it's so hard. Like, life is really hard and complicated, and unexpected things happen. And we all have these pains and these strained relationships and hard things we have to walk through. And for me, when I get caught up in it and I find myself going days where I am consumed by it, that is when I know. And I can just tell because I'm not laughing, and I'm maybe barking at my 3-year-old when she's throwing a tantrum instead of being patient, and I can't sleep. I find that when I get in that mode, I know, because I've been living this out for so long, that I'm looking at the wrong thing. I'm looking at the thing that's going to pass away when Jesus makes all things new. And so I shift my focus. I try to force myself to remember what I believe and live like it's real. And if I'm struggling to do it, like I was last night, I text my sister-in-law, Lauren, and I'm like, hey, can you pray for me? Because I'm not peaceful right now. And she gets it, and she knows what the truth to speak over me. And yeah, for me, it's joy and peace when that is not present in my life.
I think those are great markers to look for because, I think so often we can misidentify or sometimes we don't even realize there's a problem. We've just been in the mode for so long that we don't realize it's a problem. And I think the important distinction is that exactly what you've said. It's not that we're saying that to be without anxiety is to deny that there are challenging, difficult, unexpected, tough things that happen. Yeah. That's not ever going to be what it is. Yeah. And that's actually not the antidote for anxiety and worry. And so to be aware that it's something beyond, that it's relationship, that it's understanding that we are eternal beings, that I think those things bring the kind of hope in that we really need to grasp because this world's just going to keep spinning like it does. And for those of us who can only find peace and joy when everything's going just right, it's just going to not be showing up in most of your life.
And I don't know about you, but I'm the most anxious when everything's going right.
Well, because then I start worrying what's about to go wrong.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think, and I loved in one of your blog posts that you said about finishing this book that you were already sad about your book as you were finishing it.
I remember that.
And I so identified with that feeling because as I wrap up different writing projects, I do go into this weird time where I'm like, well, oh no. Well, what if I don't ever get to do another one?
Totally.
Well, what if nobody ever signs me again? Well, what if this one doesn't, sell the way that we thought? And blah, blah. And I can all of a sudden be shortchanging what should be a celebratory moment. Yep. I'm exchanging it for the anxiety about a future that doesn't even exist yet. Yep. So how have you learned to rest in celebrating the good moments and not get into that place where you're projecting ahead and you're already worried about the next thing?
Yeah.
How can we stay better in the moment and celebrate when good things are going on?
That's a great question. I was going to say I don't want to be redundant, but I just keep reminding myself. But you know what? I think for that kind of thing, it's like, who am I worshiping? Because I think like for me, with the writing stuff, and I've written about this, and it's, I have it very prominently on all my stuff because I want to help people not do what I did for so long. But like I don't know if you're into Enneagram.
Oh yeah, baby.
Okay, so I'm a 3.
Amen. Here we go, sister. Right there. All right.
So I'm like, what else can I get done? And will definitely, when I'm not looking at the Lord, fall into like achievement mode. How can I do more things and achieve more things? And for me, when I'm not resting in the blessings I have, I think it's idolatry in my heart. And I don't know. I think that's just like, it's probably different for everybody. I don't know if I would put that in my anxiety category. I guess it is a kind of anxiety. I've never thought of it that way. I've kind of had that in its own box of like, am I pursuing eternal things? Am I looking at eternity? Or am I pursuing temporal things? Am I pursuing my own glory? Am I holding on to things that can crumble, which will make me anxious? So you're right. It is all kind of thing. You're really smart. You're making me think. I don't know.
I love what you're sharing here. So much wisdom and so much heart. So Scarlet, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Scarlet loves her some Instagram, so be sure and connect with her there. Have you seen our show notes? Be sure and check them out at AllMomDoes.com. And while you're there checking out the show notes, look around a little bit. It's an awesome community of support, great ideas and tips, and all kinds of inspiration for the life you live. I'd love to see you too over at Instagram and Facebook. You'll find me at Julie Lyles Carr. Come and tell me hi. I'll see you next time on the Modern Motherhood Podcast.